Rain spat against the asphalt in jagged, frantic dribbles, turning the city streets into a slick mirror of neon and shadows. A lone police cruiser cut through the storm, wipers struggling against the relentless sheets of water. Inside, Officer Malik's hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, heart tuned to the rhythm of urgency that comes only in moments that matter. And then he saw it, a tiny shape shivering at the edge of the street, soaked to the bone, eyes wide and unblinking, staring directly at him. There was something in that gaze, a desperation so raw it clawed at the chest, a silent plea that no words could carry. The car slowed. Malik's instincts kicked in before reason could. The little German shepherd puppy, no bigger than a loaf of bread, trembled violently, whining and scratching at the wet curb. The city seemed to pause. Only the howl of the wind and the relentless patter of rain filled the space between them. And in that instant, Officer Malik knew he wasn't just seeing a stray. He was witnessing a life on the edge, asking for a chance, and he couldn't turn away. Rain hammered the city streets, sharp and relentless, turning sidewalks into rivers and alleyways into black mirrors reflecting the flickering neon of shuttered shops. Karim's coat was soaked through, the cold clinging to him like a second skin, but he didn't notice. He was running, feet splashing through puddles, chest tight with the kind of fear that doesn't leave even when you think it should. Behind him, footsteps echoed, not quite in sync, but close enough to remind him that someone was following. His lungs burned with each gasp of wet air, his heart a frantic drum. The city, usually indifferent, seemed alive tonight, a predator, a witness to everything. He stumbled into a narrow alley, pressed his back against the damp brick, listening. The rain muted the sounds around him, but he could still hear it, the scraping, the low hum of movement behind him. Karim's hands shook, partly from cold, partly from adrenaline. He had spent the last hour running from the wrong people for the wrong reasons, and now, in the heart of the storm, he realized he had nowhere left to hide. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, to vanish into the chaos of the rain-soaked city. But exhaustion, a deep-bone tiredness, had begun to creep in. Then he saw her, a girl, no older than 16, huddled against the wall of the alley, soaked through, shivering violently, her dark hair plastered to her pale cheeks, eyes wide with fear and something more primal. The desperation of someone abandoned, of someone utterly alone. She hadn't seen him yet, but her body tensed, ready to bolt. Karim froze. He wanted to run, but he couldn't. Something in her gaze, raw and unfiltered, held him still. He approached slowly, trying not to startle her. "It's okay," he said, voice low, almost swallowed by the rain. The words sounded absurd in the storm, meaningless even, but they were all he had. She flinched but didn't move, eyes darting to him, then back to the wet concrete beneath her. Karim noticed her small frame trembling violently, the thin jacket doing nothing to protect her from the rain and wind. He realized that she was soaked to the bone, probably hadn't eaten in hours. His chest clenched at the sight, a mirror of his own helplessness. Minutes stretched as they stared at each other, rain washing over them, water running down the walls, collecting in puddles that reflected a world that felt unreal. Karim's hands were shaking as he reached into his coat and pulled out his scarf, wrapping it around her shoulders as gently as he could. She flinched at first, then relaxed ever so slightly, the smallest crack in the wall of fear she had built around herself. Her eyes searched his face, trying to read his intentions, and Karim felt the weight of responsibility press down on him like the storm pressing down on the city. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said again, softer this time. He noticed her eyes glimmering with unshed tears, the way her lips trembled as if she were holding back a sob. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but he didn't know if it was true. The storm outside was merciless, but inside the alley, a fragile connection had begun to form. Two strangers, each teetering on the edge of despair, finding a tenuous thread of trust. Finally, she nodded slightly, the first gesture of acknowledgement. Karim extended his hand slowly, keeping his voice calm and steady. Her fingers brushed his tentatively, a small, electrifying touch that anchored them both in the moment. He felt the pulse of fear beneath her skin, each rapid heartbeat echoing his own. And in that instant, Karim understood. This wasn't just about finding safety from the storm outside, it was about surviving the storm inside, the storm of fear, mistrust, and isolation. The wind howled around them, tearing at the loose ends of their clothing, at the edges of the alley, at their fragile resolve. Karim led her cautiously toward the brighter street beyond, each step a negotiation, each glance an unspoken question. The city seemed endless, a labyrinth of wet streets and shadows, but they moved forward, propelled by a single, unspoken understanding neither could face the night alone. By the time they emerged onto the main road, the storm had not softened, but Karim felt a small victory, a fragile thread of hope in a world that had given them little reason to believe. She shivered violently, her breath catching in ragged gasps, and Karim wrapped his coat around her, the warmth of his body a temporary shield against the cold. For a moment they just stood there, soaked and trembling, letting the rain wash over them, letting the storm outside mirror the storm inside, knowing they had found the first flicker of trust in a night that had offered little else. The first shelter they reached was little more than an abandoned community center, its brick walls scarred with age and neglect, windows streaked with rainwater and grime. Inside, the faint smell of damp wood and mold mixed with the sharp tang of cleaning chemicals. Karim had found it almost by accident, ducking into a side door when the storm outside had intensified, turning the streets into rivers of mud and reflection. The girl hesitated at the threshold, her small frame rigid like a deer caught in headlights. Karim gave her a slow, encouraging nod. "It's safe here," he murmured. His voice felt thin in the cavernous space, swallowed by the echoes of dripping water and distant thunder. She stepped in cautiously, her wet shoes leaving dark prints on the cracked tile floor. Karim followed, taking care to keep the distance she seemed to need, even though every instinct in him screamed to pull her into warmth and safety. She sank down against a peeling wall, knees drawn up to her chest, shivering so violently it was audible over the rain. Her eyes darted nervously around the empty room, scanning corners and shadows as if expecting threats to emerge from the darkness. Karim felt a pang of recognition. He had lived in fear for longer than he wanted to admit, had spent nights trembling behind locked doors, heart hammering in the silence. He crouched across from her, careful not to invade her space. "I know you're scared," he said quietly. "I don't know why you're out here, but I want to help." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of the storm they had just endured together. The girl's gaze flicked up to him, and for the first time, he noticed the bruises along her forearm, faint but distinct, the kind that spoke of fear and endurance rather than accident. Karim's chest tightened. He had no illusions about the life she had lived, but he also knew that the thread of trust could be built, if only slowly, if only carefully. Minutes passed in tense silence. The rain outside had softened to a mist, tapping lightly against the broken windows. Karim pulled a dry blanket from his bag and extended it toward her, letting the corners brush her knees. She flinched then, slowly, took it in her hands, clutching it to her chest like a fragile shield. Karim kept his voice low, steady, unhurried. "You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you. Not while I'm here." He watched as her body trembled, small shudders that betrayed exhaustion, hunger, and the memory of countless nights spent defending herself against a world that had not been kind. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small bottle of water. "Drink," he said, holding it out. Her hand hovered, fingers trembling, before she took it and sipped, careful, cautious, as if even hydration might contain hidden danger. Karim noticed her movements, every twitch, every hesitation, each a language of survival he had begun to understand. It wasn't just fear, it was calculation, protection, a learned instinct to navigate danger. He nodded to himself, silently acknowledging the resilience he saw, the spark beneath the layers of terror. Hours passed. The rain softened into a constant drizzle, the shelter filled only with the echo of their quiet breathing and occasional creaks of the aging structure. Karim learned to read her shifts in posture, the tightening of shoulders, the quick glance over a shoulder, the brief flicker of defiance when he tried to coax her closer. Each moment of trust she offered was fragile, and each retreat into herself was a reminder of the walls built over years of pain. Karim knew he had to move slowly, like water carving a path through stone, gentle and persistent. By late evening, she had allowed him to sit a few feet closer, letting their knees almost touch. He spoke softly, telling her stories of his own childhood, of nights when he felt lost, of people who had helped him in small, unexpected ways. She listened, eyes wide, wet lashes blinking rapidly, lips pressed together. For the first time, he saw something beyond fear in her gaze, curiosity, a tentative connection, a flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, she was no longer alone. At one point she whispered, voice barely audible over the rain. "Why are you helping me?" Karim smiled faintly, a wry twist of lips in the shadows of the shelter. "Because someone did the same for me once," he said, "and it changed everything. Maybe I can give you the same." She didn't answer immediately, just pressed the blanket tighter to her chest, but the slight tilt of her head suggested she was listening, processing, weighing the truth in his words against the weight of her past. Night deepened. Karim moved closer, careful, letting his shoulder brush hers without forcing contact. The warmth was subtle but undeniable, a small reassurance in the cold, damp room. He thought about how many nights she must have spent alone, fighting fear with nothing but instinct and willpower. He thought about the nights he had done the same, and he realized that sometimes survival alone was not enough. Sometimes it took connection, a single anchor to keep the tide from pulling you under. Eventually, her breathing slowed, the tremors less pronounced, the tight coil of her body easing slightly against the blanket. Karim stayed by her side, silent but present, letting her know that safety could be more than an idea. It could be felt. And in the quiet hum of the storm outside, in the shelter that smelled of damp brick and hope, a fragile bond began to form. It was tentative, delicate, and utterly human, the slow emergence of trust between two strangers who had been battered by life's storms and found, for the first time in a long while, someone who might just understand. As dawn approached, the rain finally faded into a soft mist. Karim watched her sleep, chest rising and falling in uneven rhythms, fingers curled around the blanket. He felt the weight of the night in his own bones, exhaustion and adrenaline tangled together. And yet he felt something else too, a sense of purpose, a quiet determination. He had survived the storm, but now he understood that helping her survive it, fully, was the real challenge. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, Karim felt hope. Not loud, not triumphant, but steady, like a heartbeat beneath the rubble of fear. The shelter had become a fragile sanctuary, but the outside world remained relentless. The storm had passed, leaving the streets slick with puddles that reflected the gray morning sky, and the chill had seeped deep into every corner of the city. Karim had spent the night awake, watching over her as she slept, marveling at how someone so small could carry such weight of fear in her eyes. The faint marks of bruises and scars told stories he couldn't fully know, and yet he felt them pressing against him, demanding care, demanding presence. He realized then that a shelter wasn't just a place of refuge. It was a crucible, a test of patience, empathy, and endurance. By mid-morning, the girl had woken, blinking against the pale light filtering through grimy windows. Karim offered her a small breakfast he had managed to procure, a piece of bread, some water, and a worn, slightly dented tin of fruit. She accepted it cautiously, fingers brushing his hand ever so slightly, betraying a mix of hunger and hesitation. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as though every action might trigger danger. Karim watched silently, letting her set the pace, letting her know that the shelter could be her space, that here, no one would force her into comfort before she was ready. He walked the small hallways with her, helping her explore the spaces beyond the main room. A hallway with broken lockers, a dusty classroom where sunlight barely penetrated the grime on the windows. Each corner was a test of courage, each shadow a challenge to her instincts. Karim spoke quietly, narrating small observations, the way sunlight fell on the cracked tiles, the faint smell of wet wood mixed with mold, the echo of their footsteps as they moved. Slowly the girl began to respond, naming colors in the peeling paint, noticing patterns in the cracked floor. Each word was a victory, a sign that her mind could allow curiosity to coexist with fear. Yet trust was never linear. Moments of courage were punctuated by retreats into herself. A loud crash from outside, a shutter slammed by the wind, sent her flinching violently, knees pulled to her chest. Karim held out a hand, careful not to rush her. She hesitated, and he saw the flash of raw survival instincts flicker across her face's fight, flight, or freeze. The storm may have ended outside, but inside, fear still raged. Karim knelt slowly, speaking softly, letting his voice become a tether. "You're safe," he said, again and again until the tremors of panic began to ebb. He realized that this was the pattern of trust, small steps forward, tiny steps backward, and the patient rhythm of presence between them. As the day stretched on, Karim and the girl established routines, fetching water, organizing blankets, tidying corners of the shelter. Physical tasks became bridges of connection, each cooperative gesture a subtle affirmation that they could rely on each other. He watched her face light up briefly when she successfully stacked a pile of blankets, a smile so fleeting it might have been missed if he weren't watching so closely. It was the first real sign of life beyond survival, a glimpse of the child who had been buried beneath fear. Karim felt a surge of both relief and awe. It was a reminder that resilience was not absence of fear, but the courage to act despite it. Evening fell, and with it, a quiet intimacy that grew from shared silences. They sat side by side, backs against the wall, watching shadows deepen in the corners. Karim didn't force conversation, he simply let her presence exist alongside his. The city outside hummed faintly, distant sirens and the occasional car engine blending with the soft creak of the shelter's old floorboards. He could feel her breathing gradually lengthening, the shallow tremors of anxiety giving way to something steadier. It was progress, slow and uneven, but undeniable. Night brought a different challenge. The shelter's thin walls allowed every creak and groan to echo, every sound magnified in the quiet. The girl flinched at distant noises. A car door, a dog barking, footsteps from the street below, and Karim held her hand, the warmth of physical presence a small shield against imagined threats. She squeezed back hesitantly, and in that squeeze was a conversation neither needed words to speak. Trust, he realized, was as tactile as it was emotional, a series of small, repeated reassurances that gradually rewired fear into a sense of safety. Over the next few days, the shelter became a space of quiet transformation. The girl's steps grew surer, her glances less frantic, her voice more willing to break the silence. Karim noticed tiny acts of courage. She began to explore the yard outside, examining puddles, tracing patterns in the brick walls, even laughing softly when water splashed unexpectedly on her shoes. These moments were small, but in them, Karim saw a reclamation of a life that fear had almost claimed entirely. He marveled at how resilience worked, not as an instant leap but as a patient accumulation of tiny, persistent actions that slowly reshaped perception. By the end of the week, they had developed a rhythm, an unspoken understanding of boundaries and presence. The girl began to confide in him, first in fragments, then in slightly longer sentences. She spoke of family she had lost, of nights spent wandering empty streets, of hunger and cold, of fear. Karim listened, never interrupting, letting her story flow as though speaking it aloud could release it into safety. He felt the weight of her history settle into his chest, and though it was heavy, he also felt a strange warmth, the acknowledgement that human connection, fragile and tenuous as it was, could survive even the most harrowing circumstances. By the time the sun rose again, a soft, muted light filtering through the dusty windows, Karim realized that the shelter had become more than a place of refuge. It had become a crucible of trust, a space where fear could be confronted and tempered into hope. And though the girl's journey was far from over, he understood something essential: survival alone was not enough. But shared survival, marked by patience, presence, and gentle persistence, could transform terror into the faintest glimmer of life. For Karim, the lesson was unmistakable. Protection was not about walls or doors. It was about patience, about allowing someone to reclaim themselves on their own terms, about becoming a steady, unwavering presence in the life of someone who had known only uncertainty. And as he watched the girl move through the shelter with a quiet confidence, carrying blankets, checking windows, whispering tentative observations, he realized that sometimes the smallest victories were the most profound. Weeks had passed, and the shelter had become both a haven and a crucible. Karim and the girl had formed a rhythm, small, silent acknowledgments that spoke louder than words. She now moved through the space with cautious confidence, carrying blankets, stacking supplies, her eyes flickering occasionally toward him with that fragile, tentative trust. But trust, Karim knew, was not a shield against the world. The world was relentless, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel, and tonight, that truth would come crashing into their fragile peace. It began with the sirens, distant at first, then closer, urgent, slicing through the quiet hum of evening. Karim felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He had spent years learning to read the city's language, the sounds of pursuit, of danger, of sudden violence. He turned to her, seeing the flinch, the small gasp she tried to suppress. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice low but steady, carrying both reassurance and command. She nodded, wrapping the blanket around herself, eyes wide, breathing uneven. Then came the knock on the door. Heavy, insistent, authoritative. Karim moved first, positioning himself between her and the entry, hand brushing the cold metal of the lock. "Who is it?" he called, voice calm but firm. There was no answer, just the rhythm of a heartbeat amplified by fear. The girl stepped behind him, pressing close, and he felt the weight of her trust, fragile as it was, resting squarely on his shoulders. They were two lives tethered together, tested now by the sharp edge of uncertainty. Karim opened the door slightly, enough to see the shadows beyond. 3 figures in dark jackets stood in the misty evening light, faces obscured, voices low and urgent. "We know she's here," one of them said, a cold edge to the words. Karim's pulse jumped. He recognized the type. Predators who preyed on fear, on vulnerability. His mind raced, calculating, strategizing, balancing the instinct to protect with the need to keep the girl calm. He tightened his grip on her shoulders subtly, feeling the tremor of fear ripple through her body. The first figure stepped closer, pressing the advantage. Karim didn't flinch. "She's not going anywhere," he said evenly. "You need to leave." The words were simple, but the resolve behind them carried weight. The shadows hesitated, assessing him, testing the line. Karim could see it in their stance. His confidence, small though it might seem, made them question the ease with which they had assumed dominance. The girl gripped the blanket tighter, her breathing shallow, eyes darting from him to the figures, and back again. Karim leaned down slightly, whispering into her ear, "Look at me. Stay calm. Trust me." He could feel the warmth of her body against his, small, trembling, and yet steadying. It was in that contact that he drew strength, a reminder that this bond was not just for comfort. It was a weapon, a shield forged in the quiet moments of trust they had built together. The standoff stretched, taut as a wire ready to snap. Karim's eyes never left the intruders. His mind worked in measured, precise calculations, escape routes, distractions, ways to leverage every inch of the shelter. Then, as if reading the same instinctive thought, the girl moved slightly, picking up a chair with careful, deliberate motions. Karim's breath caught. She was small, but her courage was emerging, rising from the foundation of trust they had spent weeks constructing. "Throw it if you have to," Karim whispered. "But only if you need to." She nodded, and when the first figure stepped closer, she swung the chair, not in aimless panic but with precision born of desperation. The impact startled the intruders, buying Karim the seconds he needed. He pushed the girl behind him, then grabbed a heavy metal bar from a nearby corner, using it to wedge the door partially closed. The intruders cursed, their momentum halted by the unexpected resistance. The rain had returned in a soft drizzle, mist curling around the edges of the building, masking their movements. Karim grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a side exit he had scouted days earlier. They moved quickly but carefully, the shelter's shadows becoming allies, the storm outside a curtain hiding their escape. Each step was measured, precise, a dance of survival built on trust and shared resolve. Once they were outside, Karim let them collapse behind the low brick wall of an abandoned lot. They were soaked, shivering violently, but alive. The girl leaned into him, small body trembling against his chest, and he held her tightly, whispering assurances over and over. The adrenaline faded slowly, leaving a raw, tremulous awareness of just how close they had come to disaster. He could feel the pulse of life in her, fragile but unbroken, and he understood something essential. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. As the night deepened, the city around them hummed with indifferent continuity. Karim and the girl sat together, hands intertwined, listening to the rain patter against broken rooftops, feeling the rhythm of survival echoing in their veins. Each shared breath, each careful glance reinforced the bond they had forged. A bond tempered by fear, strengthened in crisis, and unbreakable in its quiet intensity. When dawn finally began to creep over the horizon, painting the wet streets in muted gold, Karim looked down at her. The terror had not disappeared from her eyes, but it was tempered now by the first flickers of confidence, of recognition that she could face the world without being consumed by it. She met his gaze, and in that silent exchange was a profound acknowledgement they had survived together, learned to trust each other when the world demanded vigilance, and discovered the quiet, unspoken strength that comes from connection. Karim understood in that moment that bonds forged in crisis were the ones that endured. They were not born of convenience or circumstance, but of shared risk, mutual courage, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. The shelter, the storm, the threat, it had all been a crucible, refining them both, leaving them raw yet stronger, vulnerable yet unshakable. And as they stood together in the quiet aftermath, drenched in rain and relief, Karim felt the pulse of hope in both of them, a reminder that even in the darkest nights trust, courage, and human connection could ignite a light powerful enough to guide the way forward. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, soft and tentative, washing the city in pale gold and silver reflections. Karim and the girl sat on the curb outside the shelter, damp clothes clinging to them, hair plastered to their faces, hearts still pounding from the night's ordeal. The storm had passed, but the street still glistened with rain, puddles reflecting the fragile new day. The air smelled of wet concrete, distant smoke from chimneys, and the faint sweetness of morning mist. Everything around them was quiet, save for the occasional bird, hesitant in the hush and the soft, unsteady breaths they shared. She leaned against him, small and fragile, yet carrying the weight of a hard, earned courage. Karim watched her face, tracing the lines of fear that had once defined it, now softened by trust and relief. He remembered the night they first found each other in the alley, the raw panic in her eyes, the trembling body pressed against cold brick. And now she was here, alive, breathing steadily, her gaze no longer darting, no longer searching for invisible threats. She was reclaiming herself, piece by piece, and Karim felt a quiet, almost sacred pride. "Where will you go now?" he asked softly, not out of doubt, but out of the need to honor the reality waiting outside the fragile sanctuary of the shelter. Her eyes flicked toward the streets, brightening faintly with morning light, yet shadowed with hesitation. She had nowhere permanent to go, no family to claim her, no place to call home, and yet, for the first time in weeks, she seemed willing to imagine it. Karim realized the true meaning of rescue. It wasn't simply bringing someone to safety. It was giving them the strength to face the world on their own terms. She took a deep, steadying breath, and for a moment, the city seemed to pause around them, the chaos held at bay by this delicate, suspended moment. "I want to try," she whispered, voice soft, uncertain, yet carrying the weight of resolve. Karim nodded, understanding without needing further words. He had seen courage in action, raw and unpolished, in the quiet choices she had made over the past days, walking outside, speaking her story, standing firm when fear still threatened to control her. The dawn wasn't just light breaking over the city, it was light breaking inside her. Karim offered his hand, a gesture of continued trust, and she took it. They walked together through the streets, puddles rippling under their careful steps. The air smelled of damp asphalt and morning freshness, each breath a reminder of survival, each step a reclamation of power once stolen by fear. Karim felt the rhythm of their shared heartbeat in the subtle sway of their pace, the soft brush of fingers, the quiet glance exchanged. They were no longer just survivor and protector. They were companions forged in trial, bound by the fire of shared experience. As they reached the edge of the city park, the sunlight grew warmer, golden and forgiving, casting long shadows across wet grass. Karim let go of her hand for a moment, watching as she ran her fingers over the damp leaves, testing the textures, savoring the simple sensations of a world she had long feared. The smallest smile broke across her lips, tentative but radiant, a light that had been buried beneath nights of despair and the heavy shadows of survival. Karim felt a lump in his throat, a mixture of relief, awe and profound love for this fragile human life he had helped carry back from the edge. She paused by a fountain, water catching the sunlight in sparkling arcs. Karim stayed a few steps back, giving her space, letting her breathe, letting her reclaim autonomy. "You can choose," he said softly. "Every step from here is yours. I'm just here to remind you that you can." Her gaze met his and he saw the flicker of trust, stronger now, steadier, no longer tentative. For the first time she didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. She simply nodded, acknowledging the truth of his words and the power of her own choice. A distant church bell tolled, echoing across the awakening city, a reminder of time moving forward, of life continuing beyond their small, precious bubble. Karim and the girl walked side by side, their shadows stretching long in the morning light. The streets were no longer ominous corridors but avenues of possibility, each step forward a testament to courage, resilience, and the quiet strength of human connection. The memory of fear lingered, but it no longer held dominion over them. The storm had shaped them, tested them, and left them stronger, bonded in a way that neither would forget. Finally, they reached the shelter of a new building, a community center being reopened to offer housing and support for those in need. Volunteers emerged, gentle and smiling, welcoming the girl with a warmth that Karim could not have created alone. She hesitated, just for a moment, and Karim's presence was the anchor that steadied her. Then, With a small nod, she allowed herself to step forward, walking toward a new chapter of life with her head held just a fraction higher than the day before. Karim watched, heart swelling with emotion, feeling the subtle ache of release and the profound joy of witnessing someone reclaim their life. He remained outside, rain-soaked streets drying under the early sun, reflecting on the journey. The alley, the storm, the shelter, the moments of fear and courage, the nights of quiet bonding, the standoffs and crises. Every instant had led to this fragile, perfect resolution, a life saved, not just from immediate danger, but from the suffocating weight of isolation and despair. Karim understood something essential: true redemption was never about a single heroic act, but about the accumulation of trust, patience, and love in small, deliberate gestures. As the sun rose fully, warming the wet streets and shimmering across puddles, Karim felt the weight of the past lift slightly from his own shoulders. He had been shaped too. His own nights of loneliness, his own doubts about purpose and humanity, had found meaning in this bond. The girl turned once, smiling at him, and in that glance he saw gratitude, trust, and something deeper. Recognition that survival together had transformed both of them. The city awakened around them, indifferent yet beautiful, buzzing with life. But Karim carried a quiet inner peace. He had faced storms, external and internal, and emerged with the knowledge that even in the darkest nights, hope could be found, nurtured, and shared. And as he watched her disappear into the new life waiting for her, Karim knew that the dawn wasn't just a time of day. It was a state of being. A promise that no matter the shadows behind, light could always be reclaimed, and lives could be reshaped by courage, trust, and human connection. The streets glimmered with residual rain, the first warm winds of morning brushing Karim's face. He smiled faintly, a quiet, almost imperceptible curve of lips, feeling the pulse of hope lingering in both himself and the girl. The storm was over. The night was behind them, and yet the bond they had forged in fire, fragile, raw, and beautiful, would endure, an indelible mark of trust, courage, and redemption that neither would ever forget.